Hey everyone, it is Friday, May 16th. You are listening to the Mo News Podcast. I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts. We read all of the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As you could tell, it is just me again today. Moshe is still traveling. If you hear him pop in at some point, it's because he just cannot stay away.
Folks, this is Moshe. Jill was right. I couldn't stay away. So I am popping into today's podcast with a few late evening thoughts as I've been traveling all day between Indianapolis, Houston, and Little Rock for various speeches I've been given. Yes, I am taping this late after Jill taped her portion. So back to Jill, but stay tuned for a couple times I jump in during the podcast.
It is Friday. I'm not sure about all of you guys, but I'm ready for the weekend. Apparently, by the way, May 16th is National Mimosa Day, National Pizza Party Day, National Love a Tree Day, and National Work from Home Day. I can get behind all of that. And with that, let's get to the headlines here. The Supreme Court hears arguments on President Trump's executive order, which looks to end birthright citizenship. But this case is actually more about the power of individual district judges and whether they can block a president's agenda, what the justices had to say about it on Thursday. Overseas, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky set to send a Ukrainian team to Turkey for peace talks with Russia. But Zelensky and Vladimir Putin won't be there. What President Trump has to say about it all. Back here in the U.S., some good news. Overdose deaths are way down. What experts say is behind the trend. Meanwhile, Florida just banned fluoride from public water. What we know about it. To the economy, talk of a trade war has calmed down, but some big banks warn that a recession is still possible. And sticking with tariffs, Walmart says it's going to have to raise prices. And what's old is new again. Apparently, some old-fashioned baby names are roaring back into fashion. I'll tell you which ones have some renewed popularity. Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating. Okay, let's start with that high-stakes case at the Supreme Court. The justices heard oral arguments on Thursday about the enforcement of President Trump's birthright citizenship order. The main question for the justices, though, is whether lower courts overstepped their authority by blocking that January 20th order on a nationwide basis. So to be clear, this case is more of a referendum on the use of nationwide injunctions. Presidents from both parties, members of Congress, and several Supreme Court justices have raised concerns about a single federal judge in a single district having the power to temporarily block a president's nationwide agenda. In the case of President Trump, we have seen this come up with his efforts to shrink the size of the government workforce, halt government spending, and end diversity programs. As for this birthright case on Thursday, there were more than 2 hours of oral arguments, and it isn't entirely clear how the court is going to resolve the issue. Reading the tea leaves here, 5 of the 6 conservative justices seem open to backing the president, saying that lower courts have gone too far with these nationwide injunctions. But at the same time, they also don't seem ready to do away with the longstanding Supreme Court precedent, which upholds birthright citizenship. A reminder here about birthright citizenship: for about 100 years or more, the courts have understood that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution guarantees, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States to be U.S. citizens, no matter the immigration status of their parents. President Trump signed an executive order on his first day in office of this second term, denying birthright citizenship to children born in the United States to non-citizen parents. The Trump administration has argued that it's trying to prevent, quote, birth tourism, which is when expectant mothers come to the United States to give birth, ensuring that their children can be U.S. citizens. But again, the court on Thursday looking at whether lower courts overstepped their authority by blocking the January 20th order on that nationwide basis. Some court watchers say that several of the conservative justices seemed open to lifting a nationwide order which blocks Trump from enforcing his birthright citizenship policy. But they are still struggling with the practical implications and the consequences of allowing the administration to deny citizenship documents to some people born in the United States. 3 lower federal judges said that the order violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And then in a somewhat unusual move, the justices agreed to hear oral arguments on whether those nationwide injunctions were too broad or should have applied only to the individual states or the advocacy groups that sued over the order. Justice Elena Kagan, who is one of the liberal justices, said that although many of the justices have expressed frustration about the way that lower courts are, quote, doing their business, the case before them was, quote, very different from the typical case. Here's a bit of the back and forth between Kagan and the Solicitor General, John Sauer, who's arguing for the Trump administration, with Kagan asking if the executive order, or EO as she calls it, is illegal, which she believes it is, then what is the better way to stop it? Take a listen.
Look, there are all kinds of abuses of nationwide injunctions. But I think that the question that this case presents is that if one thinks that it's quite clear that the EO is illegal, how does one get to that result, in what time frame, on your set of rules, without the possibility of a nationwide injunction?
On this case and on many similar cases, the appropriate way to do it is for there to be multiple lower courts considering it, the appropriate percolation that goes to the lower courts, and then ultimately this court decides the merits in a nationwide binding precedent. You have a complete inversion of that through the nationwide injunctions with the district.
So, General Sauer, are you really going to answer Justice Kagan by saying there's no way to do this expeditiously?
So that's Amy Coney Barrett, who was appointed by President Trump, jumping in there. The justices also signaled that they may try to find some type of middle ground. As for what's next, typically the court wouldn't issue this decision until late June or even early July. However, because of the nature of this case, we could potentially get a decision sooner.
So Jill was right. It's Moshe here. I couldn't stay away. I have a few thoughts on the arguments. I've been listening to them as I traveled on Thursday. And based on listening to the arguments, this decision could really go either way. It was fascinating hearing the arguments yesterday. And although several of the conservative justices in recent years have expressed skepticism about what's called nationwide injunctions, which again bar the government from enforcing a law or policy anywhere in the country while the injunction is in place, I will say that based on the arguments yesterday, about 2 hours of those arguments, it's not clear where the majority of justices will end up here. It appears, again, there could be a very slim conservative majority, but Barrett and Roberts could go either way here, meaning this could continue to uphold nationwide injunctions, or you could see a very slim majority of the justices say, the way that injunctions are being used shouldn't be the case here moving forward. So the Supreme Court could uphold it. The Supreme Court could overturn it. And a reminder here, yesterday's case was less about the merits of the birthright order and mainly about these procedural issues. They at times did discuss, the executive order, birthright citizenship, which has been the law of the land for more than a century now. But ultimately, the Trump team brought this to the court specifically to deal with the nationwide injunction issue, because, of course, an injunction was put in place. So Trump could not enforce this executive order, reimagining what birthright citizenship is. Now, as far as the argument from the Trump team here, they say that the use of these injunctions is a problem, that they prevent novel legal questions, new legal questions from percolating in the lower courts. They require courts to move way too quickly, and they circumvent the more stringent rules that have existed for a while for class action lawsuits that can block things. So their suggestion here is class actions exist. People should use class actions and shouldn't depend on just a judge to put forth a nationwide injunction, leaving it to one person there. Now, as far as the liberal justices were concerned here, this order remaking birthright citizenship is clearly unconstitutional. So blocking it was the obvious thing to do here. And so as far as they're concerned, injunctions made sense here. And injunctions are here for a reason, including a case like this. Which gets us to how these 9 justices might rule on this. Again, the Trump DOJ brought this regarding injunctions and not the case itself. They say that's still being dealt with by lower courts. But a couple of liberal justices here said, you know what, while we have it, can we just rule on this? Because this is, again, from their perspective, so clearly unconstitutional that the courts have upheld the 14th Amendment, meaning, as far as they're concerned, anyone born on U.S. soil, regardless of their parents' citizenship, is a citizen of America. That is what they believe birthright citizenship should be. Now, the Trump folks, as part of the executive order, have argued that no, this doesn't apply to people here illegally who just have kids here. That was not the intention of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment came out of the Civil War, and it was meant to basically ensure that all slaves became citizens. So does the court rule on this? Well, the liberals are saying, can we just do this? Can we just get this out of the way? The conservatives mainly focus their arguments on the injunction issue, the ability to block laws, as opposed to the specific law in question here. And that'll be one of the key questions that is answered at the end of June, early July, when we expect a ruling on this case. Will the court go with a very narrow ruling? And by the way, the court lately has been going with narrow rulings on cases. So I would be surprised to see the court actually rule an executive order. Justice Roberts very much likes to just take the question that is at hand and say, hey, lower courts, you deal with the rest of this. But this is a very murky situation because if, for instance, in this case, they say, you know what, we're going to throw out injunctions. Judges can't do injunctions in this case. Well, that means the executive order goes into effect. What does that mean? That means that from that moment, every single person born in America whose parent doesn't meet the qualifications of the executive order is not a citizen here. And if the Supreme Court doesn't rule on this for another year or two, and say they rule that they hold up birthright citizenship, then you create this really awkward, legally ambiguous situation where you will have a lot of people, potentially thousands, potentially tens of thousands of people born in that period of time who are not citizens of the U.S., but also not citizens of other countries, potentially. What are they? Who are they? What does that mean for their life? And that's the murky situation the liberal justices are trying to prevent here, which is like, ultimately, this is clearly unconstitutional. Let's just rule on it. Because if we somehow try to weave this and we don't rule on the overall law, but we do rule on the injunctions and overturn injunctions, effectively an executive order will be in place for a while that could change what has existed here in the United States for more than 150 years and create a legally ambiguous mess for everyone born in that period of time. Again, should the Supreme Court eventually decide to uphold our previous understanding of the 14th Amendment. So a lot of legal questions here, a lot of murkiness. This is going to be one of the big cases we're watching at the end of June. That's when the Supreme Court rolls out sort of like a season finale, series finale of their biggest cases. And that final week of June is typically when they like to roll out the big one. So we'll be looking for that decision when they roll that out. Jill, while I have the floor, there is another story I want to mention, and I happen to be traveling a lot this week, and I am recording this right now from the airport in Houston Intercontinental George Bush Airport, on a day I'm traveling between Indianapolis, Houston, and Little Rock for various speeches and engagements here. So what better place to bring you aviation news than here? And it's not great, folks. There was another tech outage we have learned this week. It's not Newark Airport this time, but an airport out west. The FAA saying yesterday that it is now investigating how pilots flying into Denver International temporarily lost contact with air traffic controllers on Monday. Again, this happened in Denver on Monday. It lasted about 90 seconds, around 1:50 p.m. on Monday, when Denver Air Route Traffic Control Center experienced a loss of communications with planes. Both transmitters in that location that cover a segment of airspace went down. So that meant during that time, on Monday, for about 90 seconds, that as many as 20 pilots were unable to speak to air traffic control for a period of, again, about 90 seconds. Now, the FAA does say that the controllers were able to switch to another frequency to relay instructions to the pilots and that the aircraft remained safely separated. The air traffic controllers used another frequency there, and they say that it had no impact on operations. Now, the Denver Air Traffic Control Center handles not just airspace for Denver International, but a segment of airspace in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, Montana, among the states impacted there. And we've told you that this is not just a Newark issue. This is a national issue. We have technology that is in some cases from the 1970s, floppy disks, copper wiring, and it's an issue across the country. And that's why Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy and other officials have said this is an urgent issue. Upgrades are necessary. But this, even upon congressional approval, could be a 3 to 4 year process to upgrade systems. And it appears now that the FAA is deciding to be very transparent with these outages. Again, they reinforce here the outage in Denver didn't put any safety at risk, but still a bit disconcerting, especially to me right now as I'm flying. But I have to say, I still know that flying is the safest way to travel here in America, much safer than driving. I know it's odd because you're in control when you drive, but ultimately it is much safer to fly than drive. So I'll be leaving Houston in just a couple hours, headed for Arkansas, and then eventually to New York late Friday. And my hope here is that the authorities can get this approved through Congress and begin to upgrade these systems soon, because it appears we're starting to see some real pain points in the system.
Time for the speed read, starting overseas from CNN. After a day of uncertainty, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky says he is sending a team to Istanbul, Turkey, for peace talks with a Russian delegation. He announced that his defense minister will be leading the delegation. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who first proposed the talks, he will not be attending, nor will Zelensky, who said that he wouldn't meet any official except for Putin. It is not clear when or if that kind of meeting will take place. Another key person who will not be there, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He had repeatedly hinted that he could upend his Middle East travel schedule to join the negotiations. Trump is still on that overseas trip to the Gulf. Here's his response when asked by a reporter if he is disappointed that Putin would not be attending the talks.
He wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
So he said Putin's absence does not disappoint him and that nothing on Ukraine is going to happen until he meets with Putin. Ukraine and Russia are not known to have held direct talks at any level since soon after Moscow had launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in February of 2022.
This is Moshe again jumping in here on this Russia-Ukraine story. For me, the big headline I take away from all of this is Zelensky's trying to be a good sport here by continuing the talks with the low-level Russian officials. You know, Putin effectively pulled out, sort of insulted the Ukrainians here by announcing last weekend he wanted talks, making a big deal about meeting in Turkey, and then announcing the day before he wasn't coming, is going to send some junior Russian folks to it. Now, Zelensky from Ukraine, looking to be the better person, the bigger person here, is going to continue the talks here and reinforce to Trump, at least he hopes, that Putin is the one misbehaving here, that Zelensky is the one taking this seriously. And this is a game that's being played here because remember, right now under Trump, the U.S. is really trying to be a middleman between the two, treat both sides fairly. And at times, Trump gets frustrated with Ukraine. At times, he gets frustrated with Russia. The latter has been true of late, and it appears Zelensky, despite the insult from Putin, Putin not showing up in Turkey while Zelensky was there, he's going to be a good sport, and he's going to continue talks here. And he hopes that that means that Trump has a message for Putin, though, based on those comments Jill just played. It appears Trump thinks he needs to meet with Putin personally and wasn't really pushing him hard, at least not yesterday.
Back here at home from U.S. News and World Report, drug overdose deaths decreased by more than 25% from 2023 to 2024. That's according to some data released from the National Center for Health Statistics. Overdose deaths involving opioids decreased from about 83,000 in 2023 to about 55,000 in 2024. Overdose deaths involving cocaine and psychostimulants like methamphetamine, they decreased as well. There was also a sizable decrease seen in overdose deaths from fentanyl. Almost all states saw decreases, although South Dakota and Nevada saw slight increases in 2024 compared with 2023. Experts say there are several possible factors driving the decline in overdose deaths. The most likely reason, the greater availability of naloxone or Narcan, which can help reverse the effect of an overdose, plus improved access to addiction treatment, changes in how people use drugs, and the growing positive impact of opioid lawsuit settlement money. However, the CDC says that despite the overall improvements, overdose remains the leading cause of death for Americans 18 to 44, underscoring the need for ongoing efforts to maintain this progress. From the New York Times, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida signed a bill into law on Thursday that bans the addition of fluoride to public water supplies, which makes Florida the second state to prohibit the widespread public health practice. Studies show a clear correlation between fluoridated drinking water and improved oral health, including fewer dental cavities. Fluoride was first added to a city's water supply in 1945, and then the practice spread around the country in the following decades. But DeSantis and other prominent Republicans have criticized fluoridation as an example of government overreach, drawing parallels to masking and vaccine mandates during the coronavirus pandemic. So this law puts DeSantis and Republicans who dominate the Florida legislature at the front of a growing national movement. RFK Jr., President Trump's health secretary, recently called for all states to ban fluoride in drinking water. In March, Utah became the first state to outlaw the practice. Ohio and Texas are also weighing fluoride bans. So the argument in favor of a ban is that fluoride is naturally present in many foods, and experts say that excessive exposure to fluoride over a long period can lead to health problems. The case against the ban, dentists and a number of public health experts say that fluoridated water is safe and it's actually essential for protecting oral health in children. They say the mineral prevents cavities by making teeth stronger, and they say that reducing tooth decay can in turn reduce the risk of other chronic conditions that are linked to oral health, like heart disease. The CDC has called the benefits of fluoridation one of the 10 greatest public health achievements of the 20th century.
All right, Moshe back again here on this fluoride story. This is a story that Jill and I have obviously been covering for a while here, going back to last year. A reminder, just some historical context for all of you. Fluoride was mandatorily added to water after World War II when we had a major cavity issue in America. So we discovered by adding fluoride to water that would have a positive effect, in particular for military recruitment. Harry Truman was president at the time, and a large percentage of recruits were having to not be accepted into the military because of how bad their teeth were. So that's why, based on a couple experiments in Michigan and some other places, they saw that fluoride in the water worked. And so ultimately they decided to start adding it across the country. But there is a feeling now that 80 years later, that between fluoride and toothpaste and just how much better we are at brushing our teeth these days, that fluoride in the water is not necessary. Now, the counter argument is that some people are still not good at brushing their teeth. And there have been various experiments in Canada and other places with removing fluoride from the water, discovering just cavities exploding, skyrocketing after that. And there have been cases where they have then decided several years later to put fluoride back in the water. The concern in particular is lower income communities where people might not be able to afford toothpaste. And that's where the state or the locality steps in by putting fluoride in the water to protect those people's teeth. So this is a situation we will now watch in both Utah and in Florida.
To business news from CNBC, Wall Street titan Jamie Dimon said Thursday that a recession is still a serious possibility for the United States, even after the recent rollback of tariffs on China. He says if there is a recession, I don't know how big it will be or how long it will last. Hopefully we'll avoid it, but I would not take it off the table at this point. Specifically, Dimon said he would defer to his bank's economists who put recession odds at close to a toss-up. In their latest note, they say the chance is still elevated, but below 50%. Dimon's comments come less than a week after the U.S. and China announced that they were sharply reducing tariffs on one another for 90 days. The U.S. has also implemented a 90-day pause for many tariffs on other countries. But Dimon says even with the tariff pauses, the import taxes on goods that are entering the U.S. are still sharply higher than they were last year and could cause economic damage. He says even at this level, you see people holding back on investment and thinking through what they want to do. And on that front from CNN, Walmart, which is the world's largest retailer, said that President Trump's tariffs are too high and that it's going to have to raise prices on some items. The CEO saying, quote, "We will do our best to keep our prices as low as possible. But given the magnitude of the tariffs, even at the reduced levels announced this week, we are not able to absorb all of the pressure given the reality of narrow retail margins." He says the higher tariffs will result in higher prices. Tariffs on China are raising costs on electronics and toys. Also, some food costs are going up from tariffs on Costa Rica, Peru, and Colombia. Walmart says the price hikes will start later this month. And finally, from the New York Post, in recent years, out there, creative or trendy baby names were all the rage. But now it seems like the classic old-fashioned ones are popular again. According to Jennifer Moss, who is the founder of babynames.com, grandma-like baby names like Eleanor, Eloise, Elodie, Alma, Margaret, Nora, and Bennett are super trendy for girls this year. As for boys, there are also some old-fashioned names like Theodore, Oliver, Owen, Jasper that are quite popular. Also Lachlan, Sterling, Palmer, and Hayes. So why are these dated names gaining traction again? Experts say vintage names evoke a sense of nostalgia. One baby name expert saying she gets a lot of clients who pull out their family tree and they want to look to their grandparents or great-grandparents for name inspiration. And according to Sophie Kim, who is the editor-in-chief of Nameberry, which is a baby naming website, parents today are also leaning towards just more simpler names for their babies. She says more families in the U.S. are coming from mixed cultural backgrounds, and she hears parents commonly request that they want their child to travel and have a relatively easy to understand name. But they do point out that just like fashion trends, baby name trends ebb and flow. So if perhaps your name is no longer in fashion, just wait a couple of decades. And despite old school names like Eloise and Margaret making a comeback, two of the most popular baby names, Liam and Olivia. So Moshe's daughter, Olivia, in good company.
Jill, obviously I have to jump in here. I was actually, given how popular the name has been for a few years, expecting a lot more Olivias in some of her classes, and I haven't met that many. What's interesting, actually, if you look at the top 10, is there's two spellings of Sophia, with a PH and an F. So if you actually combine those together, I think Sophia would be the top girl's name in America. They count the spellings differently. Nonetheless, in my household, we are obviously very much on Team Olivia.
All right, everyone, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. I'm going to be watching Joan Rivers, a dead, funny, all-star tribute. One of my friends watched. She said it was hysterical. More than a decade after her passing in 2014, her legendary career and lasting impact in the comedy world was honored with an epic, action-packed special on NBC. It already aired, but an extended and uncensored version is now available to stream on Peacock. As for what I am reading from The Atlantic, Trump's real Secretary of State, how the president's friend and golfing partner Steve Witkoff got one of the hardest jobs on the planet. Of course, we know Marco Rubio is the actual Secretary of State, but as Moshe and I have been talking about, Witkoff, who really has no foreign diplomatic experience, has kind of become President Trump's special envoy for more or less everything. He helped persuade Hamas and Israel to accept that January ceasefire and hostage agreement. According to The Atlantic, just this week, he worked behind Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's back to pressure Hamas through an intermediary to release Don Alexander, who is the last living American hostage in Gaza. He's also been tasked with helping Ukraine and Russia reach a ceasefire and a whole host of other things. His name was apparently in discussions for NSA, but he said, no, thank you. Anyway, I'm very excited to read that piece in The Atlantic. And as for what I am eating, I really hope that Moshe is bringing back some candy from the Sweets and Snacks Expo. The Dubai chocolate sounds wonderful, as do the double gummy things that he was mentioning. So Moshe, if you are listening, I am expecting some goodie bags.
Jill, I am listening, and not to worry, I have enough goodie bags to go a couple weeks here. Enough candy and chocolate and snacks that I don't know what to do with. It's sort of like when you were like, trick-or-treating and you brought home way too many candy and chocolates and you were old enough to realize that you couldn't eat all that stuff. They were giving away so much stuff at this Sweet and Snacks convention in Indianapolis. And so even my wife, Alex, I called her last night and she's like, what are you doing with all this stuff? I was like, I don't know. I'm bringing a suitcase home with chocolate. We'll figure it out. So I'll bring it to the office. Rest assured, there are a lot of options and you actually need to come in next week and prevent me from a sugar shock or sugar high. Here I was at the convention in Indianapolis. There's some coverage, by the way, for those of you who have missed it. This is like the big convention where all the major brands roll out their new snacks. So we have coverage over on our Instagram page, the main one, as well as the premium page. As for what I'm eating, while I have the floor here, well, some of my snacks I brought home, including Dubai chocolate, including the new Nutella peanut butter flavor that was rolled out at the expo this week, as well as Lesser Evil had a stand. We love Lesser Evil popcorn in my house. Himalayan Gold, and a couple other new flavors they're rolling out here. So I'm really excited to try those with my number one popcorn fan, Alex. My wife is a huge fan of popcorn. It's like her favorite food, literally. So we're going to try that when I get home this weekend. While I'm here, might as well tell you what I'm reading and watching as well. What I'm reading, I just got Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling. It's a book by Ross King, and it's not a new book. The book's been out for like 20 years. I've been meaning to read it for a very long time, but was inspired by the most recent conclave happening in the Sistine Chapel. It was like, oh my God, there's a book by the Sistine Chapel I want to read. It's basically Michelangelo, how he was convinced to paint the Sistine Chapel. He didn't want to do it. His process, some really revealing, compelling details in that book. So that is Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling by Ross King. And as far as what I'm watching this weekend, NBA playoff basketball, baby. Knicks can close it out tonight against the Celtics to make the NBA Eastern Conference Finals. Against the Pacers, just came from Indiana, and that state is pumped. So we'll be watching that game tonight, and we are getting through the final season of You over on Netflix. And I just have to say, Anna Camp is amazing. She plays identical twins, and it's really a compelling watch. You, obviously a very dark show, but you start to still root for the characters despite some of the bad things that they do. So we're finishing up You at home. All right, Jill. That's it from me from Houston. I'll let her finish this podcast up, folks. We will be officially reunited where we can actually interact with each other next week.
All right, everyone. That is a wrap on this Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us kindly in the App Store. Those reviews really do matter. Again, have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.